Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 333 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is Stop Living on Autopilot. Our quote of the day comes to us from Mandy Hale. 10 years from now, make sure you can say you chose your life. You didn't settle for it. We have taken a couple weeks off from our podcast, and we have been extremely busy recording a bunch of episodes. I wanted to both thank and acknowledge you, our listeners. I understand that there are thousands of podcasts you can listen to, and we truly appreciate you checking ours out. Thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with our guest today. His new book, Stop Living on Autopilot, is fantastic. Antonio Neves absolutely delivers, and then some. So make sure you grab a pen and take some notes, as I know you will get a lot from today's episode. Antonio, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. I appreciate the message that you share, and it's an honor to join you here.
So, first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Oh, 100%. If I can do more than one, awesome. But if it's just one, that's going to mean the world to me, as you know firsthand. You know, the trickle effect, the compound interest of positively affecting one person, it can go farther than we think it can.
You know, not to digress for a second, but so many people answer that first question in different ways. But I think the reality is with social media and where things are today, everybody wants to go from 0 to 100. And what you just said is so powerful, is that compound effect. If you positively impact me, I'm going to positively impact maybe one of my kids or a coworker, and then they're going to go home and positively impact somebody or a teammate. And all of a sudden, that quote unquote just one person turns into 10, 15, 20. And imagine if we did that every day or every other day, we'd be, I think, in a better place than we are today.
Easily. And something I think your listeners should know is, even prior to you hitting record, is that you encouraged me by sharing some of the things prior to hitting record. And I think sometimes people forget, people in spaces like ours, people that write books, people that regularly speak or lead trainings, they think that maybe we don't need the encouragement, that we don't need the positivity, but we need it just as much as anyone else. And the question I always like to ask people is who encourages the encourager? And just, again, I don't need to get into the details of what you shared with me prior to this, but you encouraged me in a way that I frankly needed today. So I appreciate you. So for those folks right now who are listening that have some positive people in their lives, that have great things going on, that regularly encourage you, I want to remind you to encourage them as well and let them know they're doing a good job, and thank them and appreciate them, because they're not the ones always to ask for it, but sometimes they're the ones that need it most.
I think that is so powerful. And we were obviously talking about a friend we have in common, John Gordon. And I think the one thing that you just said is so spot on. And it's why I have such a appreciation for John, because he flat out comes out and says he's not always positive. And his wife is very adamant. And she says that there was a time where, you know, she was going to leave John because he was not very positive, but it's those people that come into your life. And I really appreciate you touching on that. So before we jump in, I'm going to challenge any listener right now, for those people that are in your life that encourage you, that lift you up, be an encourager back to them. Maybe pause the podcast here and shoot them a text message, or leave them a voicemail, or remind yourself to do it later, because we all need encouraging. So I appreciate you touching on that.
Absolutely. And just briefly, speaking of John Gordon, since we're giving this guy all the effusive praise that he deserves, you know, every year John Gordon does this amazing Power of Positive Summit. And I've had the opportunity to participate that in a few times. And I just recently participated in the most recent one. And one day, as I was getting text messages and all these social media messages from people sharing my message that I gave, I had to stop, like you just said. And I grabbed my phone and I left John this voice note. And I just said, John, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for putting this thing together every single year to support and to encourage others. And I just want to encourage you, and I want to pray for you and just say thank you for what you do. I know you don't need it, and I just want to take this moment to say thank you. So, John, if you're listening, thank you for all you do.
That is awesome. And I actually just made a note myself when we get off recording here. I'm going to reach out to John and just let him know that we connected, because I think the one thing we know is 1 degree of separation and positivity leads to more positivity in relationships.
Absolutely, and we maybe we'll get into it. But John has a few reasons we're talking today. John has played a critical role in those, so maybe we'll talk about some of those.
Maybe we should just send this to John and tell him we just had a podcast all about him.
Let's do it.
So the number one reason I started this company is to motivate and inspire people to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a challenging time personally or professionally where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. First and foremost, I'll give you two. The first one is after my sophomore year of college, I was on the track and field team at Western Michigan University, where I was a walk-on. I tried out for the team and I made it. And after a couple of years of being on the team, I was doing absolutely horrible. And the reason why I knew I was doing horrible is because one day my head coach, Jack Shaw, old school coach, came up to me and let me know I was doing absolutely horrible, and some really aggressive words. But what Coach Shaw did for me in that moment, he didn't cut me from the team like he could have because I wasn't performing. He pointed out to me in that moment that, we had some top athletes on our team. One would go on to compete in the Olympics, one would go on to compete in multiple world championships. But he pointed out to me that in the 2 years that he's seen me on the team, that not once had he saw me spend any time with them. He said, instead, you're hanging out with other folks. These folks are laying back on the high jump mat, laughing and having a good time. Not bad people, not people committing crimes, but not all Americans, not the best of the best. But what Coach Shaw did for me that day is, really expose me to what it meant to surround myself with good people who are going to challenge me, push me, hold me accountable, and push me to make me better. I call these folks allies of glory. And I did start spending more time with those individuals, and that allowed me over the course of the next couple of years to eventually earn a partial scholarship. And no, I didn't become an All-American. I didn't become an Olympian. However, it exposed me to what work ethic looked like, what commitment looked like. But most importantly, what it exposed me to was, in this society nowadays, I think we're really good at calling people out. You want to call someone out, your colleague, society. But I think what we also have is the opportunity to call people up. There's a big difference between calling someone out and calling someone up. And what Coach Shaw did for me in that moment was called me up. Now, he did it in a way that challenged me. Like, I think the way you call someone up, each person is different. Like, I think people have to remember that one size fits all coaching, one size fits all leadership doesn't work. Don't get me wrong. If you're responsible for 300 people, it's kind of hard to have an individual relationship with everyone. However, if you do have the luxury of being able to connect with people one-to-one, know that you can take a unique approach with each person. So he called me up that day. And what that reminded me of is this whole notion of, a knife. I was playing with this workshopping this yesterday with a friend. Like, a knife, if you're a mugger, you can use a knife to steal something from someone or to stab them or to shank them in prison or something, right? What's amazing is that a knife can also be wielded by a surgeon who make things better, right? But it may hurt by the surgeon, but when the surgeon's doing it, it may hurt. There may be some pain after the surgery, but it's going to make you better. So if you are that manager, if you are that leader, you have a knife, right? How are you using your knife? No matter what, it may cause some type of pain, but is it the type of pain that's going to make things better, or is it the type of pain that's going to make things worse? Thank goodness Coach Shaw on that day, challenged me in the right way with his quote unquote knife and made things better for me. So that's one story I can think of where I could have given up, but I persisted and moved forward with it.
One thing you said, the difference of calling someone out versus calling someone up. And I think that is so powerful. It reminds me of when people offer quote unquote constructive criticism, when basically I think it's the way to be like, hey, can I offer you some constructive criticism? It's like, well, you stink or you're really bad, as opposed to, can I give you some feedback? And I think not only the way you frame it, but how you lead into it is super important. And I think your coach clearly wanted to send a message to you, but to your point, he could have cut you. He didn't. He said, hey, think about the people that you're surrounding yourself with. And I just think that was a really awesome story, the way you touched on that.
Yeah, he was amazing. I miss him, and it's funny as you get older, you realize all the genius you had around you in your youth that you just ignored. Unfortunately, I'm speaking for myself right now, but also I think something else we can do when it comes to feedback and constructive feedback is something I like to do is ask, "Hey, can I offer you some feedback?" Nothing is worse, in my opinion, than unsolicited feedback. Don't get me wrong. If I'm your manager, if I'm your boss, and there's some things that aren't working out, I'm going to share these things with you. There's no sometimes you don't have a choice, but I can choose how I share that. But feedback in many ways it's how we choose to look at it. In this day and age. If anyone gives us any type of feedback, we get super. A lot of people get defensive. They call someone and oh, that person's an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about. It's like we're giving a stiff arm to the feedback. Those things that can make us better. Like what we're talking about is something I talk about in the book "Stop Living on Autopilot." This idea of good friction and how good friction can propel us forward. I'll share a quick story with you that I think viewers and listeners will really dig. When I was in grad school, I was working on my master's thesis, and I had this professor who was amazing. He was a Pulitzer Prize winning author, like the top award you can win, like in journalism. And he was the one, working on, my leader for my master's thesis. And whenever I would turn in drafts of this thing, he always saw my hesitation and how much I didn't want to turn it in, and I was late sometimes. And one day he just called me up. He said, "Let's talk. Why are you late? What's the hesitation when you're turning in drafts of your thesis?" And I said, "The problem is that I know when I get it back from you, it's going to come back with so much red ink. There's going to be so much more work to do." And he said something that I'll never forget. He said, "Don't you know you pay for the red ink?"
Mm.
Like, I'm in grad school. Don't you know you pay for the red ink? That's where the magic is. That's where we get better. The red ink, the friction. So invite yourself. The next time someone's giving you feedback on something, constructive feedback, especially if it's good feedback, know that this can propel you forward. This can make you better. It's not going to be easy. It's like that knife, right? But it's helping you. And I think far too many people, and listen, I'm guilty of this throughout my life. I've resisted that when we should all be running towards that quote unquote red ink.
That's a really interesting point you make, and not just from the red ink perspective, but when we pay for courses, when we pay for different type of learning, the whole perspective of it is not to go somewhere and be told within in a couple hours that hey, you're perfect and you just passed your way through. It's like when people talk about getting to a goal, it's not just that goal, it's what or who you become along the way in the journey. So I think that you touched on that, and I appreciate that. Before we jump into your book, interesting question we ask each guest is if you had to define yourself, but you could only pick one word, what word would you pick?
Woo, man, that may be the toughest, awesome, most awesome question I've ever been asked. If I had to define myself in one word, it's challenging, man, because it's the words that are coming into my head are our husband. I'm thinking father. I'm thinking so many different things, but the word I'm going to say, believe it or not, is champion.
Mm.
Like, and not because I've won a national championship, not because I've won any crazy national awards, but I have this habit of calling my kids champions sometimes. I want to instill something in them. And, every single night before our 5-year-old twins go to sleep, the last thing I say to them in the midst of their prayer is, you are strong, you are healthy, you are loved, you are a conqueror, you are a child of God, you are a Neves. And I'm just instilling, I want to instill like faith in them. I want to feel strength in them. I want to remind them of who they are with these affirmations. And I think I chose the word champion right now, just as a reminder that I think I need right now for myself to persevere. As it's crazy. I'm not sure if you're a boxing fan, but I love when you see boxers talk to boxers. And especially, most boxers, wherever were like world champions, at some point lost the belt.
Hmm.
But have you ever noticed that even when people see them, like even fans say, "Hey, what's up, champ?"
What's up, I was just about to say they're always, even if they've lost, they have that title, I think, forever almost.
Right. And I think in many ways, regardless of your faith, I think we were born with the crown over our head, right? The day that we were born, if you regardless of your faith, I feel like we're all children of God. And I think sometimes we're born with this crown and we have it, but at some point we forget it. And we have to, we have to remind ourselves to straighten our crown. Sometimes we have a crown on, but it's crooked, and we forget who we are. We forget our last name. We forget what our parents instilled in us. We forget what our community instilled in us. We forget the people that are betting on us to do great things in our life. We forget that we have kids that are looking up to us, etc., spouses. And I'm speaking to myself right now. We forget these things. And so I have to call myself champion. And I'm not sure about you and your work, but now we're getting personal. But I feel like, when I tweet something, when I put something on social media, I think a lot of folks that may say, "Who's this guy to say X, Y, and Z?" I have to remind people sometimes that for me, the audience comes last. If
Mm.
you ever saw anything from me, it was for me first. It was for me first as a reminder. The words you read in my book, when you see something from a tweet that's personal, that may dig, that may sting a little bit. Antonio was talking to Tony. No one calls me Antonio. I'm Tony. That was me. I'm talking to. So that's a little reminder of myself for champion today.
That is a powerful word, and I think that it's a perfect word based on where we are so far. But jumping into your book, which, as we spoke before we jumped on here, Stop Living on Autopilot. I think even if you don't know anything or read the subtitle, or even if you don't flip through, I think that title enough makes you or gives the potential reader an idea of what this book's about. And one of the things that I've championed, using your word as well, putting out on social media, and something I believe in my company, is that we are not meant to be average. And I mean we in general. And we are not meant to, quote unquote, just get by. So candidly speaking, I saw this title and I said, you know what? I said, I gotta read it. And as we were saying, I flip over to the back, and our buddy John gave an endorsement. So I said, all right, I'm definitely in good company. But gotta ask you, where did this concept or idea come from? Because I think not only where we are currently in 2021, but I think this is a message that we all need to read and see more so today than ever.
This book came from a place where I think a lot of your listeners are going to resonate with this. It came from a place where, on paper, back in 2016, everything, and even 2015, everything in my life was looking good on paper. If you did a Google search of my name, Antonio Neves was killing it, speaking all across the globe, coached the top people, uh, 3 successful self-published books. Um, you look on LinkedIn, again, successful, maybe even look at the bank account or the house, the family, et cetera. On paper, on the internet, everything looked good. But as you probably know firsthand, the internet tells a story, it does not tell the whole story. So even though I met the external markers of success, what folks, your listeners here in the United States will call the American dream, there's still something was off in my life. In many ways, I'd found myself going through the motions. I was on cruise control. Um, I, for lack of a no, I had stopped being bold and courageous in my life. I think about the kid that moved to New York City back in the year of 2000 with less than $1,000 in his bank account, with the goal of breaking into the television industry. That person who had that hustle, who had that vigor, who had that optimism, who had that positivity that there was nothing he couldn't do, that person no longer existed. I was phoning it in on stages, sometimes in front of hundreds or thousands of people giving keynotes. The unfortunate thing for high performers, top achievers, is that you probably know this. Sometimes our 80% is good enough. It may be good enough for the audience, but we know internally it's not good enough for us. And because I wasn't being bold, because I wasn't being courageous, because I wasn't really stretching myself, I was, as I say in the book, I was a Ferrari, but I was only driving that Ferrari 35 miles per hour. That's not what they're built for. And when I say I'm a Ferrari, by the way, I'm not saying I'm special. I believe that everyone listening right now in some way is a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. We're not built to go just 35 miles per hour. We have multiple gears that we can shift. And because I wasn't doing the things I know that I was called to do, because I wasn't challenging myself creatively, because I really wasn't putting myself fully out there, I was still hiding in many ways. And we can talk about hiding in the uniform. I started developing some coping mechanisms. I found myself watching way too much Netflix and seeing the screen come up saying, "Are you still watching?" Which is what an attack. Are you still watching? Like, stop attacking me. I found myself having that casual or a drink of whiskey or tequila or wine in the evening, or that second one to kind of deaden the angst that I was feeling. I became a secret cigarette smoker, something that I despise, a former collegiate athlete. I became a secret cigarette smoker. In a moment that started to change my life, and one day I was hiding, smoking cigarettes in an alley in Los Angeles. I'm wearing this bright green gardening glove. What I perceive to be a homeless man comes up to me and he's like, "Can I bum a couple of cigarettes?" I'm like, "Absolutely." We start talking like smokers do. And one moment he's like, "Why are you wearing that bright green gardening glove?" And I'm like, "Well, my wife doesn't know that I smoke, so I wear this glove so she can't smell it." And he looked at me like I committed a crime. And he said to me something I'll never forget. He says, "Hey, man, you got to figure that out." There's an expletive in there. You got to figure that out. And that message right there hit me so hard. In this moment, this guy on the internet who allegedly was killing it, father of two newborn kids, newly married. And here I am with a man who had seen better days telling me I have to figure things out. And that set me on the course to recommitting to my life, to recommitting to being a champion, to recommitting to being all in, to not phoning it in, to not wearing the uniform. And it was scary. It was scary, but it was most necessary. And this book, in many ways, chronicles that journey. To be clear for your listeners, it's not a memoir, though I do share personal stories and anecdotes in there. But it was my journey to recommitting to the life that I believe I'm meant to lead.
That was one of the stories in the book that really stood out to me in regards to the gardening glove. And yes, there's obviously some humor behind it, but for me, the most successful people in all walks of life, and it's for the listeners to decide what that means and what those walks of life are. But when I look at those people, they've all failed more often than others. They've all struggled, but it's who and what they become during those struggles. And I think what you shared and why I was so infatuated with your book and your stories is it's not about me being the best, meaning you, and everything perfect and never having a bad moment or a bad day. It's here's where I struggled, and here's a point in time where I said, you know what, I got to figure this out. So I really appreciate you touching on that.
I just want to add, I think this is important. I think another reason why I wrote the book is I'm not sure if you've experienced this in your work, but in my work over the past, almost 10 years doing leadership and development work, I've also come across so many successful men and women who, again, on paper, everything looks good, but they'll come up to me after keynotes. They'll come up to me after workshops. These are the coaching clients I've worked with over the years, and they'll say things like, "I'm not as happy as I look on Facebook or Instagram. I don't feel as successful as I look on LinkedIn, even though on paper my life looks good. I have everything everyone says I should be happy. I That's not how I'm feeling internally." So I also wanted to give people permission, because you probably know these men and women who are quote unquote successful, but don't feel like there's any space for them to share what they're feeling, to really share their challenge. "Oh, what are you complaining about? You have a good job with a nice title. How can you complain? You have a nice house." So I wanted to create space also for people who may be quote unquote successful, but stuck, to have an outlet to share things, because most people think you got to be down and out on your luck, bankrupt, in the gutter to have a transformation. But I think there are people who are doing quote unquote fine that need support. So it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, being willing to encourage the encourager.
That's an interesting point you touch on in regards to you speaking at events and certain people coming up to you and referencing that they're not as happy as they seem on Instagram or social media. Here's maybe a difficult question. It could be like another 6 podcast episodes, but I find it interesting that people, and I've done it in some ways, put out just what they want other people to perceive on social media. And I think for me, one of the things that attracts me to different people on social media is the people that are transparent and the people that are vulnerable, saying, "Hey, today's been a difficult day." You touched on the fact that you needed some encouragement to begin today. And I think that, just to honor you, that's where and how we learn. And that's why this book is so good, because it's about not just saying, "Hey, I'm Antonio Neves. I'm perfect. I've never had a bad moment, never had a bad day. I'm undefeated in every single thing." No, it's here's who I am. here's where I am now, but here's where I was a couple years ago. And I think my objective with this show and the stuff that I do is to have those connection points where someone reads or hears something. Maybe they had no idea who you were prior to this, and they're like, you know what, I needed to hear that, or I needed to read that, or you know what, once I get done listening to this podcast, I'm going to go grab a copy of the book because I think it's something that I'd really like to explore.
Yeah, listen, I learned in my coaching work a long time ago that revealing creates intimacy. Those revealing creates intimacy, whether you're a leader and you're talking to your colleagues at home, in a relationship with your kids, et cetera. The more we reveal, as scary and vulnerable as that can be, most times it ends up creating intimacy with whoever you're interacting with. And look, I have a decent social media following. By no means is it anything crazy. If there's a reason why it's not crazy, it's probably because it's not glossy. It's because I'm willing to share some of the scars. I'm willing to share some of the ugly. One of the exercises I share in the book is I talk to people about being willing to embrace their story and where they come from. And I ask people to think about what are some of those things in your story that if you said them out loud, you may be a little bit embarrassed or a little bit ashamed to say out loud. And I'll say, believe it or not, those are the things that we most need to acknowledge and we most need to accept so we can move forward and not judge ourselves from the mistakes that we made in those maybe potentially bad decisions or people letting us down, but asking ourselves, instead of judging ourselves, asking ourselves this question: what can I learn from this? What did I learn from that experience? What did I learn from that bad decision? What did I learn from that person letting me down, that bad business experience, that bankruptcy, that business partner doing me wrong, that friend not being honest? We can go on and on and on. But those are the things that make us human. Most people think that their story is boring and people don't care. But I have to remind people that sometimes what we find boring about ourselves, other people will find extremely fascinating. So again, I find the more we reveal, the more intimacy it creates. And that's probably why even frankly, we're having this conversation right now because of the conversation that we had offline before you hit record. I do these podcasts almost every, quite a few a week. And 9 times out of 10, I'm not having a conversation like this. I have a talking points that I can stick to. I'll give you a good interview, but it's not always human. And when we reveal, it gets human.
No, I appreciate that, and that means a lot coming from you. One thing that just hit me like a ton of bricks in the book, and obviously you and I spoke about it offline, is what you put in your book you call your last 30 days. And I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just quickly touching on that for listeners, because I know for a fact you'll get some people that are going to follow you and definitely check out your book. But I think this concept just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, I like the last 30 days exercise because so many of us, and look, I'm a coach and I work with people, and we're all used to coaches saying, look out 3 years from now and look out 5 years from now. Tell me about your future. And let's be clear, I definitely see some value in those things. But I also know that sometimes people can get tripped up going too far ahead. But I'm a firm believer that if you want to know where you're going, what your future is going to look like, all you have to do is look at your last 30 days. And that will provide you with some really amazing, actionable data. And the way I frame it is if you happen to be employed right now, you have a job, I would like you to look back at your last 30 days at work and ask yourself a simple question. Based on the last 30 days of work, how you showed up or didn't show up. If your boss, if your manager had to make a decision to rehire you, would they immediately say, yes, I want this man, I want this woman on my team? Or would there be some hesitation based on how you did or did not show up? I like this last 30 days question, but because we can look at it also in our relationships. If you happen to be married, have a spouse, have a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, if your partner had to make a decision to recommit to you based on the last 30 days, would they immediately say, yes, I recommit to you. I want to get married again. I want to be in this relationship. Or they say, you know what? I don't know. Let's pause. We might need to start all over again with this courting process. We can look at personal finances. We can look at our health. We can look at our diet, etc. The last 30 days tells you where you are headed, not the last 2 days, because you could have had a great last 2 days. But if over the last 30 days it was pretty crappy, come on. Briefly, just on the career point, real quick. I want everyone right now to think back to when you're interviewing for the job that you're in right now. Maybe the job that you hate, the job that you complain about, the job where you don't like your colleagues. Think about when you're interviewing for this job and how fired up you were. Think back to when you found out you got the second job interview. Think back to when you found out you were the finalist. Think about when you found out you got the job, how fired up you were. Think about celebrating. Think about how you showed up on day one, week one, month one, year one. Now, the question is, how much of that woman, how much of that man still exists today? Are you still bringing that day one energy, right? What are those things that you have stopped doing that got you to where you are today? I don't want to gloss over that. What are some of those things that you stopped doing that got you to where you are today? I coach many executives. These are super talented, high achieving, top performing men and women with titles like CEO, Senior Vice President, Executive Vice President, Vice President. The amazing thing that happens is sometimes by the time they find me, they're struggling because the things that got them to that job, they stopped doing. They got the vice president title, they got the director title, but then all of a sudden they got in the chair and they're like, oh, I want to hold on to this so tight. So they stopped doing all those things that got them there. I like to equate this to, if you love sports, like to this football, right? I love football. And I love, we've seen those games. It's the first half of a football game. Some team comes out, they're killing it. They're up 30-0 at halftime. Next thing you know, fourth quarter, 2 minutes to go, the score is 30-28. They're up by 2 points with 2 minutes to go, yet they were up by 30 points in the first half. They came out in the first half playing to win. They came out in the second half playing not to lose. Woo! Those are two different approaches to life. For that person listening right now, are you still playing to win? Again, being bold and courageous, or are you playing not to lose? That's what I was doing back in 2016, holding on for dear life, playing not to lose. Those are two different approaches to life. You know, we talk so much about this word commitment. You've heard it nonstop. You got to commit. You got to commit. Yes, we got to commit. And after you commit every single day, you have to recommit to what you say is most important. We forget about recommitting. You don't make just one commitment. You got to recommit to that job every single day. You got to recommit to that partner. You got to recommit to your personal finance. You have to recommit to your health, to your diet, etc. Right? So I think that's how we can think back to those last 30 days. And if you don't like the answer, when you look back at your last 30 days and all those different categories I mentioned, don't beat yourself up. This is all just data. Because guess what? Now it's just awareness. Now you can act on it. You can make a brand new decision today. I like to have fun with this. So a question I always ask my clients is this right here. If your life was a movie, what would the lead character start doing to turn things around? It's our movie, right? But yet we're treating ourselves sometimes like supporting cast members. How dare us? How dare we? How dare you? How dare I, in this one life that I have, treat myself like a supporting cast member, always talking about I'll get to it tomorrow. As the Spanish proverb goes, tomorrow is often the busiest day of the week. Our opportunity is right now. So again, if you don't like your last 30 days, that's okay. It's data. Today, not tomorrow. Today, you get to make a brand new decision. Tomorrow, you recommit to it, make another decision.
I think I could break down like 500 things you just said, but one of the things that really stood out is when you speak about your last 30 days, you referenced, don't look at those last 2 days. I put out a post today and, anybody can have one good workout. It's not challenging to have one good workout. I don't know anybody that's ever, come out and be like, remember 4 years ago, it was in August, I had that one amazing workout and it's been so good that I never had to work out again. It's like you said, it's not the last 2 days. It's what have you done the last 30 days? And I said this with you, but I was speaking down outside of DC last week, and I shared that concept and idea with both the faculty and staff as well as, freshmen, sophomore, junior, and seniors in high school. And there were some eyes just, opening. And I said, maybe you might be sitting next to, your significant other or a friend or a teammate, those last 30 days, how have you been? Would you select yourself for that team? Would you recommit to that friendship or that relationship? And a couple people's eyes opened up. And to your point in the book, you said that when you started asking that question, you get that uncomfortable movement in the seats, and people are like, "Oh man, this guy's asking not the cake questions.
people start paying attention. It's funny too, because I have to remind myself with the corporate client, and you'll appreciate this, with the corporate clients that I work with, that I do keynotes for, or I do workshops for, or group coaching for, or even when I'm talking to a potential, coaching client. A lot of times, at minimum, I work with someone individually for 10 sessions, at minimum 10 sessions. But sometimes, like, how about just one session? Or how about just 4 sessions? And I like to have fun. I'm like, okay, let's say you're out of shape, you have a big belly, and you go work with a personal trainer and you want a six pack. Do you think you're gonna have a six pack in 3 sessions with that trainer?
Too, right?
Like, no, it take it takes time. So even when I'm working with an organization, I'm like, great, bring me in for one talk. That's okay. And if you really want sustained impact, you want to see ongoing results. A one-off is not going to do it. If anything, let's start with something quarterly. Let's make this ongoing. Unfortunately, that's what I'm not to digress, get in a different conversation, but that's what a lot of organizations do. They think they can outsource leadership and management to like one-off events. I'm sorry, if you think your annual leadership and development event's going to do it, yeah, it'll have a temporary bump in engagement and all of that. And this has to be an ongoing commitment. It breaks my heart during the pandemic when I saw so many organizations immediately cut budgets for leadership and development and training. But that's another subject.
No, that's definitely another subject, and I agree with you on that. I want to change lanes to a question that I really enjoy, and I know you're familiar with the famous Jim Rohn quote, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." If I had the opportunity to grant you dinner and you could level up with any 5 people, dead or alive, who would you pick?
Oh wow. Any 5 people, dead or alive? That's a really, really great question. And man, I could go so many directions with this. But the truth is, for me, these days at this age, hitting the 40s, I'd keep it personal. I have two grandparents that I was so young I never got to know. One died before I was born, and another one died when I was young. So my two grandparents on my father's side would be at that dinner. I'm so interested in my family history and background that I just don't know. That would be important to me. Again, I'm gonna put my other two grandparents on there on my mother's side as well. Those are 4 people right there. I know these. I know that's not the Martin Luther King and Gandhi's and Mother Teresa kind of folks probably that people normally give in Cassius Clay, but all 4 of my grandparents would be amazing. And I'd have to say the fifth person that I would add into that mix, it'd be my father, only because my father has dementia. He can no longer speak, and he's in a long-term care facility now, and haven't been able to have a conversation with that guy for years. And so I miss those conversations, and you kind of go back and wonder all the missed opportunities that you had to learn certain things about the family and the backstories and all that kind of fun stuff. So I apologize for listeners that are expecting me to say Seth Godin or all these other amazing people that I'm looking at on my bookshelf. But these days it's feeling more personal, so it'd be family.
No, that's why I love that question, because you get a deeper dive per our comment before about the social media person versus the real person. I think that's awesome. We're going to switch over to what we call our hot seat questions, and the only request we have of you is you spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Got it.
You have a last meal. What do you pick?
Oh, fried pork chops and potatoes.
What is your favorite smell?
Fresh cut grass.
Favorite sport?
Track and field.
Do you have an all-time favorite team?
1987 Chicago Cubs.
Do you have an all-time favorite movie?
Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox.
What is your favorite book?
Top of the head. Okay. Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield.
What is the favorite app you have and use on your phone?
The dictionary app.
What is the background picture on your phone?
My kids walking up some stairs at UCLA.
That's awesome. Do you have an all-time favorite quote?
All-time favorite quote, I have to say is, I'm going to paraphrase this, but it's St. Augustine, uh, pray as if God exists, work as if he doesn't.
And then what's that song that no matter whenever you hear it, you always turn it up and rock out to it?
Well, believe it or not, I may not rock out to it, but a song that gets me fired up is the song "One Moment in Time" by Whitney Houston, that was used at, I believe, at the 1988 or 1992 Olympics.
Olympics, yeah, that's awesome. And then what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, find out more about you, and please share anything about your book or the best way for them to get that as well?
Yeah, the headquarters for everything Antonio Neves is at theantonioneves.com, theantonioneves.com. On social media, everything's the same as well. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at the Antonio Neves. Lastly, every single week, I send out motivational text messages to people here in the United States free of charge. You can text me at 310-564-7124. Once again, 310-564-7124 to receive text messages from me every single week.
That's awesome. And then the last question we have for you is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
My parting words for everyone listening right now is to make a decision. Make a decision right now. There is something outstanding in your life, a decision that needs to be made, a conversation that needs to happen, a step that you need to take, an email that you need to send, a contract that you need to sign. There is a decision that needs to be made that you are avoiding. I ask you to stop avoiding it and to confront it right now and to make a decision and to be clear. I want you to know that not making a decision is making a decision. But I didn't do anything. Exactly. Not making a decision is making a decision. Right now, there's something, you know what you need to do. There's a phone call you need to make. There's a blog post you need to write, an apology that you need to make, someone you need to let them know that you love them, a kid's playhouse that needs to be fixed that you've been telling them for the past 6 weeks, I'll fix it next week. Make a decision.
Is there a kid's playhouse you need to fix?
Thankfully, no. I'm looking at it right now. It's actually okay. I do need to clean my grill, though. It's dirty.
Well, listen, my man, I truly, truly appreciate your time. For our listeners, grab a copy. Stop Living on Autopilot. And I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
We will. I appreciate you and all that you do. Please don't stop. Please, I can't wait to get over 500 episodes. Don't stop.
Thank you for listening to episode number 333. Antonio's quite a guy, and I'm so glad that he took the time out of his busy schedule to join us. One thing you mentioned really hit me, the difference between calling someone out versus calling someone up. And I absolutely love his idea of encouraging the encourager. To end today's episode, I challenge each and every one of you to take a look at your last 30 days. Really look at who you have been and how you've shown up these last 30 days. If there are areas you feel you fall short, or perhaps you feel that you could make some improvements, do just that. Instead of focusing on or highlighting your shortfalls, instead, focus on making those little adjustments and slight improvements. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.